Damien Riehl, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Horace?
I am doing very well as well. And listeners, welcome to another episode of Further Comments. This one's happening on the day before Thanksgiving, but you'll probably hear it way afterwards. This Thanksgiving, Damien, I haven't told you this, it also happens to coincide with my birthday.
Happy early birthday, or maybe when is your
Yeah,
birthday?
tomorrow.
Excellent. I'm thankful for
Yeah.
Horace Wu being a part of this world, however many years ago tomorrow.
Thank you. Well, I can no longer claim I'm in my 30s now because I'm no longer 3012.
That is a shame. I know I accused you in a previous episode of being middle aged, and I know that struck to the heart of your core. But I think we are firmly in the stride of our living. So welcome to wherever we are in middle age.
I've got 11 hours left, Damien, and I'm holding on to every one of those.
Amen.
Because I'm getting into my middle age, if I say silly things on this episode, please be kind and just respond with, "Wow, Horace, that's an interesting perspective."
I think so. Have you taken your pills, Horace?
The answer is obviously no. What are you talking about?
Oh, that's fun. I like to think that your wisdom will continue growing as you get older, Horace.
Until I start forgetting everything. But it is Thanksgiving, and so I want to take this moment to reflect a little. We're going to have a proper reflection episode after this one because we've invited Stephanie Wilkins to join us in our next episode where we're going to look back at 2024. But she wrote an article that she released yesterday about what she's thankful for, which is generative AI really getting to be adopted, integrated, and useful. And so I want to bring up the topic. Damien, what are you thankful for this Thanksgiving? And let's drop, the personal stuff. Let's focus on like legal tech, and what are we thankful for in legal tech?
Yeah, that's funny that the personal stuff didn't even occur to me until you said it. So that shows how awful of a father and husband that I am. So yes, of course I'm going to speak about legal tech because what else is there to speak about? I'm thankful for. I'm kind of going to extrapolate that large language models have now given us the opportunity to talk about the panoply of all the different technology that we can apply to people's tech. In the past, technology has to lawyers been just something that the IT people do or just the tech people do. I practice law. The IT people can figure out the plumbing of e-discovery or do the plumbing of contract extraction. That's something the nerds do. That's not the practice of law. But I think what large language models have done with ChatGPT's explosion and everyone talking about AI is to be able to interest those lawyers in everything else that we've had now for years and decades that they didn't even realize was a thing that actually will help them in the substantive practice of law. So I'm thankful for now being a full 2 years into our AI explosion, how ordinary people, not legal tech nerds like everyone who listens to this podcast, but really ordinary people are thinking about how their practice can be made better through large language models or the things that we've had for decades now. So kind of the combination of neural net AI and good old-fashioned symbolic AI and regular best practices for data science and the kind of software that you and I have been building over the years now can be brought together. So I'm thankful for publicity that turns into actionable insights. What are you thankful for?
So before I move on to what I'm thankful for, what you've just described reminded me of a few conversations I had earlier this year where innovation teams inside of law firms called it the great bait and switch. And maybe that's my term. Maybe I just kind of like conflated all of those into a term. It's where historically, the partners and the lawyers never go to innovation teams and say, "Hey, we really want this piece of technology." But they did that with Gen AI. They went to the innovation teams, and the innovation teams then assessed the tools and went, "Well, if you want to achieve a good first draft that's consistent every single time, love that you brought us ChatGPT, but let us show you this thing we've already got." It allowed people to really, I think, get a lot more traction with technology, which they hadn't been able to do in the past because the users weren't interested.
That's right. And by the way, large language models are probabilistic, therefore they hallucinate. Whereas this good old fashioned AI is deterministic, that it will give you a consistent output. Wouldn't this be even better than the probabilistic thing? And the user says, "Oh, yes, please."
Well, it's using different tools. For the turkey bakers and turkey roasters tomorrow, you're not necessarily going to put entire turkey on a pan to fry up. You got to use the right tools for that. That's about as much as I'm going to say on cooking because I'm going to embarrass myself in a moment. And that's when Damien, you go, "Wow, that's an interesting perspective, Horace."
That's funny. If you had ever seen my cooking, I'm not one to throw shade on cooking. So we are together in our awful cooking metaphors because I have got no game there.
Well, that's good. I'm gonna send you a photo after this. Uh, but let's talk about what I'm thankful for. And I actually spent a bit of time thinking about this one because I was the one who asked the question. I'm thankful for the new talents that have flooded into legal tech in the last 2 years. With how much venture money is going into this space, I think a lot more lawyers and non-lawyers who are actual programmers and data scientists are coming into this vertical when previously they would have stayed as lawyers or they would have stayed as a data scientist working for Google. This new talent, I think, is accelerating the capability of the technology in this space. And to me, that's really exciting. And I'm really thankful for that.
It's true. Yeah, I'm also excited about that. That, of course, where money flows, outcomes come later. And so, of course, I'm excited about the new talent that the money has brought. And more importantly, I'm excited about the new outcomes that that talent is going to bring, bringing the fresh perspectives, being able to build new, cool things that tide will rise all of our boats to be able to make
Mhm.
us better, faster, stronger. Can I taint our Thanksgiving with maybe a worry about
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
some storm
Please,
clouds?
please. It's
Um,
it's not a Thanksgiving unless families have fights and have worries. That's what I've
that's true.
learned from watching Americans.
That's right. Let me tell you about my crazy uncle that's really convinced me of some really good ideas. Anyway, no, the storm clouds I worry about a little bit with legal tech is thinking about, okay, so a lot of money has now been injected. A lot of new talent is going to be here. Maybe we're going to push a lot of things forward. I worry a bit about that money drying up and the
Mm,
return on investments not happening as quickly as the investors hoped that it would happen, and then
yep.
essentially retrenching back into this AI winter that we've seen over the decades. I think that legal tech is hot right now for good reason, because you and I know that there's a lot of value to be extracted from legal tech right now. But I worry about the impatience of investors and maybe them withdrawing the tide again.
I think that's a really valid concern. And we saw an article this week by a VC fund called Omar's Ventures. They essentially wrote an article about how they are specifically not investing in the legal vertical because of a number of challenges that they see. Big law, it's a grand total of maybe $12 billion of total addressable market. Kind of small law, really hard to get into. In-house teams, you're not really selling a vertical solution, you're selling a horizontal solution. And so looking at all of that, they're like, we don't think there's a viable case for their venture funding. And I think that's a really wise approach to assess in advance and then go, we're not going to invest because it doesn't fit our profile. But I think a lot of VCs may have jumped the gun thinking that this is a market that's going to be easy to break, thinking that they're going to change how lawyers and humans behave and get these returns back in 2 or 3 years. So I do think money is probably going to dry up, or at least if not dry up, they're going to be examined with a critical eye going forward.
When I was an antitrust lawyer, of course, everything is on how you define the market. Someone could be a monopolist in this really narrow market, but if you expand to say, no, we're just talking about technology, then there's just a tiny, a tiny sliver of the market, right? So defining the market is really the most important aspect to what you've just described. And so as you think about the legal services market, which is what you're talking about, yes, maybe there's only a few billion, or tens of billions of dollars annually, hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Like we can debate what the numbers are, but at least
Mm,
that number in the total addressable market of technology, for example, might be just a tiny, tiny sliver. But I
yep.
would wager that the venture capitalists and other investors should maybe think of law as not just legal services, but think of it like Bridget McCormick, who has got an excellent, she and Jen Leonard, who, if you don't listen to their podcast, you should. Bridget brought up the really good point that law is society's operating system,
Yep.
that every single thing that we as lawyers do is in the constraint of everything that society wants to do. So you can think of investment in legal tech is an investment in society's operating system. That is, every business that needs to operate worldwide needs to navigate the laws of those worldwide statutes, cases, regulations, etc. And so if you think not as the rifle shot of legal, which is worth a few $100 billion, but instead societal operating system, expand it that way, then it's a worthy investment, because really what you can do to be able to navigate the world's regulations and to navigate the
Mm.
case that was just decided yesterday and to navigate those risks to be able to make more money on the business side. If you think of it not just as legal services, but a business function in society's operating system, that's worth a lot more money. What do you think of that analysis?
I think it's an interesting analysis, and I'll kind of play with that on two levels. One, if you look at pure computing, who's made money off operating systems? It kind of comes pre-packaged with the hardware, or it's not a discrete spending that people think about, right? So, I think for operating systems, it's a hard sell. But if what people are saying, if what you're saying is we should be looking beyond simply legal services to every point in the operating system where you can introduce efficiencies, I think that is a valid argument. But I think the trouble with that is unless you've been operating within the system and really understand the inner workings of where the friction points are, you don't even know what to fix up. I was on a call yesterday with Todd Smithline from Bond Terms, and he said contracts is sort of, and I'm going to paraphrase, the way that companies frame all of their relationships, and it's a mess. And so the efficiencies that Bond Terms can introduce by standardizing helps these businesses become faster. But he only knows that. Todd only knows that because he's been operating as a lawyer for 30 years. How many people inside legal tech can go, yep, I've got that many years of experience? And I think that's hard. And I'm going to immediately rebut with a comment that I know some people are going to be thinking about, which is, well, what if you have 30 people with 1 year experience each? I'm going to say immediately, there's a great difference between 30 years experience and 30 of 1 year's experience.
I kind of like when I was at Thomson Reuters, somebody said, the software people says it takes 9 months to make a baby. You can't throw 9 people over 1 month and make that baby, right? So it's a good analogy. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, on the contracts being relationships, that reminds me of the great book by Alex Hamilton, our friend, and you probably know
yes.
Alex. So sign here. My biggest takeaway is that the piece of paper is, of course, reflecting legal duties, but most importantly, the piece of paper reflects our relationship. That is the relationship between the counterparties. And so if the relationship goes to hell because of the contract, we as lawyers have not done our job. Our job with the contract is to nurture the relationship and to really further the business value that really the contract creates. So the relationship is the thing. The contract is not the thing. So I think that's 100% right. Thinking about the societal framework and the societal OS and maybe how we can work law within that societal OS, that gets really important as we think about the agentics frameworks that people are talking about. I want the agent to go out, create a business plan, create a product, then create advertising to support that product, sell that product, bring in a bunch of money, and let me know if you have any problems, right? Think about all the things that can go wrong if you go down that chain of events. So that's scenario one. Scenario two, think of that same scenario, but before every step, the agent goes to the law and says, what laws could be broken with this task? And if any EU law or United States law or Latin American law would be broken, you set a threshold to say, notify a human, to be able to say, don't go any further until that human gives the thumbs up or the thumbs down. So in this way, it goes from societal OS, where right now human societies figure out what the laws are, to a programmatic, true legal OS for technology, for the agents to be able to say, this is just baked into the operating system to consult the legal large language model, the legal oracle, to see which country's laws this will violate, what is the penalties for violating that law monetarily or injunctively, and then be able to do a risk assessment of whether I should move forward with this task or not move forward with the task. This is going to be increasingly important as we go to our agentic future. This is not just a societal OS in a conceptual sense, but this can be literally the OS that agents use to be baked into the OS and say, comply with these laws. And if you're going to break one of the laws, let the humans know to be able to not have bad things happen. What do you think of that idea of saying that maybe it's a truly baked into the OS of the society of the laws?
You're going to transition us to a topic that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, and that's search and data. What you've just described is an incredible framework to have, but it's an incredibly difficult thing to build. Because right now, what people are doing with this sort of search technology, we're trying to find that information, is they're going to Google or an equivalent of Google and going, find me that answer, read all the materials, synthesize it in their heads, and then be able to kind of apply that set of rules to the facts that they're looking at. And what you're talking about with this agentic system is to go, right, now we're going to have all of these rules, and I'm kind of inferring here, baked into the model's weights themselves so that the agent can navigate them and probabilistically produce words that are going to comply with the rules that have been baked into the weights. I think that is a really, really difficult thing to build. And I don't know if there's even enough data for that, but I do think that if someone creates the proper structure for this data, then an agent might be able to navigate that. And that's possibly, in my mind, the hottest topic for 2025. Search and traversing and finding data.
I think that's right. And yeah, one way to do it is to bake it into the weights. That is to have the large language model foundational model ingest all of the EU laws and United States laws and Asian laws, et cetera, and then be able to bake that into the weights and figure out probabilistically. We'll call that option one, and that's a really good option. But of course, that's not going to account for the case that was decided yesterday or the
Yep.
EU regulatory document that just came out yesterday. So I think it needs to be a combination of foundational models knowing that as part of their weights, and then doing retrieval augmented generation where your corpus of ground truth is cases, statutes, regulations worldwide. If you have both, that's going to be better than either of them separately. But that's needed but insufficient, I guess is a way to say it. The next aspect is searching now that corpus of the case that was decided yesterday and the regulatory decision that was decided yesterday. And for that, you need to tag things up in a symbolic way. And of course, Sally is a pretty good tag. Sally Soley doing a lot of work to be able to tag up any legal text, whether it's a contract or a motion brief pleading or a regulatory document or a letter. All of those things can be tagged up. And then once they're tagged up, you can be able to search it more accurately. And that is, you're
Mm,
not able to
mm.
just do a vector search, but you can actually do traversing of the knowledge graph to be able to say that maritime negligence is related to maritime law, which is related to the maritime industry, which is related to watercraft as an asset. Essentially, if you tag all those things up programmatically, then you're going to get a much better search to be able to then find the regulations, cases, statutes, contracts that are really relevant to your thing you're looking for. And we've talked a lot about symbolic AI before and tagging.
Yeah.
What do you think of such things?
So I'm going to kind of pause for the audience, for those who haven't thought about this a lot. I think there's a couple of things that you've just discussed there, Damien. And the first is the creation of a taxonomy, the creation of the structure itself. And you can call that taxonomy or ontology, depending on kind of what's in there. Is it just a parent-child relationship, or is it more than just parent-child, which is ontology? Once you have that structure, then it's applying that structure to the data itself, which I think is a different task to creating the structure in the first place. And then after you've applied the labels or tags to data, there is a third step of retrieving. And I think that's also a different step. So maybe it will be worthwhile for us to talk about each of those steps and the challenges involved, and maybe what we expect people will be doing in the next 12 months to make these easier. So let's start with taxonomy, which I know you are one of the world experts on in the legal space.
Yeah. So taxonomy, think of it like tags. What are the areas of law? What are the services that the lawyer is providing? Am I giving advice, or am I doing a transactional job? Or is this a litigation dispute? Or is this a bankruptcy? These are all litigation tasks, transactional tasks. And then what documents are we doing this for? What are the motions involved? What are the contracts involved? What are the artifacts that really all of these things relate to? So everything that matters to the law, it can be tagged. So every time a lawyer says to me, well, it depends. And of course, that's one of some of the lawyers' favorite words are it depends. Whenever a lawyer tells me it depends, I say it depends on what? And then whatever then comes out of their mouth, I add that tag to Sally. So it depends. Oh, it depends on this. Cool. Now that's added to Sally. Well, it also depends on that. Cool. Added that to Sally. So now imagine if we had a tag for all of the it depends throughout history. And now you could be able to then say, okay, this will move the needle toward getting a deal done or not getting a deal done. This will move the needle toward getting the judgment from the judge or not getting the judgment from the judge. Tag those things up. Of course, saying that, like I'm saying it right now, is easier than doing. That is, doing is really
Yes.
hard, as Horace, you and I have talked about. That force majeure clause seems conceptually to be a very easy thing to be able to say, well, if it says force majeure, then you tag up force majeure. But what if you have a clause that just says operating clause? And then as part of the operating clause, it says, if there is a hurricane, then this is all null and void. Is that an operating clause, or is that a force majeure clause? That's harder, right? So one
Right.
thing to say, let's tag it up. It's another thing to say, what are the concepts that we're litigating or that we're negotiating? And then even if it doesn't use the words force majeure, even if it doesn't use the words act of God, maybe it's still a force majeure and an act of God. So tagging conceptually is easy, but in practice is really hard. As somebody who's done this for now many years, what do you think of such things?
So there's a famous quote, and I forget who said it, but it goes something like this: "Every model is wrong, but some of them are useful." And that's kind of how I think about taxonomy. Like if you have the simplest legal practice in the world, you can literally go into it and tag all of your content with this is litigation, this is not litigation. And therefore you have a comprehensive two tag system, which is useful to you. as a practitioner. But as you have more sophisticated practices, as you involve more people who do different things, then you start to need a more complex system like Sally or Solely that is able to then allow people to communicate between them and go, well, what I'm talking about when I'm talking about force majeure clause is boom, 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 go down the tree and go this one. And someone goes, oh, no, 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 no. We're talking about an insurance clause, which is boom, 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 a different limb of the tree. That style of being able to effectively communicate is one of the core strengths of a taxonomy. The hard part is getting everyone to agree to a taxonomy in the first place, which is something you have been pushing really hard for, and I think you're getting a quite good traction on as well. Let's start with the basic of anyone can create a taxonomy. If it works for you, it works. It's a model. But if you want a model to work among lots and lots of people, then you should probably adopt a standard that lots of people have accepted. Which then brings us to the next question of how do you then take real content and real substance and place it within the taxonomy? What's the kind of decision metrics there?
When I worked at Facebook, there was a bunch of posters all over. One of the posters that stuck out is that not everything you count actually counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. For example, swimming pool deaths are closely correlated with Nicolas Cage movies. So when Nicolas Cage movies come out, there's a strong correlation between Nick Cage movies and swimming pool deaths. Just because you count those data, does that mean it actually counts? No. The correlation is not causation, right? The second part of the quotation is not everything that counts can be counted. There are nuances in the data that really are hard to quantify or maybe impossible to quantify. So an example of that is in litigation, the tear streaming down the witness's face as they recount something. That is not going to be in a transcript. So that is not a data that even if you collect all the words being spoken, that is not going to be on there. Unless somebody says, let the record reflect that a tear is now rolling down the face of the witness. But even then, is that a crocodile tear that is insincere? Or is that a truly sincere tear, right? So anyway, so there are lots of things that count but cannot be counted, at least with today's technology. So as we think about what that matters to the law, what are the it depends that can be counted? What are the things that we, using today's technology, can be able to extract from the corpus of data, whether that corpus of data is documents or transcripts from discussions or videos, if you have video depositions. From that corpus of data, what can we extract that counts? And then let's map that data into something that is an actionable model. And all models are wrong, but some are useful. That is a George Box quote. I love that quotation. It also reminds me of Yuval Noah Harari, one of my favorite authors, talks often about a fictitious kingdom that wanted to create the best map in the world. And so they spent almost all of the kingdom's treasure on building the map. And they realized, well, any map is essentially a compression of the world. So you're going to lose fidelity. You're going to lose things that matter the smaller you make the map. So they kept making a bigger and bigger until the map ultimately became a one-to-one mapping of reality. And essentially the map overtook the entire kingdom, which exhausted the kingdom's resources, and the kingdom fell into oblivion. This is a parable that every model is wrong. Every map is wrong because necessarily by condensing it, you're getting rid of some information. But the real question is the map useful? Are the tags that you've identified for the legal things useful? Have you counted all of the it depends? And if you count a sufficient number of it depends, then it's useful enough. What do you think of that journey that I've just taken us down?
I think it's a really interesting description of what a lot of people go through when they start applying tags to their documents and their content, because they almost always, I think, start off with a really ambitious idea of we can tag everything and then it'll be all searchable and we can always bring back relevant stuff. And once they begin the process, they realize the enormity of the task and go, oh, wait, maybe we just tag one type of thing. And then you kind of like land somewhere around, we've tagged up 5 things. This is going to be useful for those 5 things. But then people get exhausted, budgets get spent. There's a project that Microsoft is doing, and I think other people are doing as well, called GraphRag. And it's the idea of you just use an LLM to help you tag things, and it will decide where to put a piece of content in taxonomy. My personal opinion of GraphRag is it's not quite there yet. It still hallucinates a lot, but efforts like that will help a lot with people trying to produce finer and more nuanced and more useful maps, with the ultimate idea of if you can create a digital twin of whatever's in reality, then that's something that can be used for simulations, that can be used for searching and actually finding useful information. We're very far away from that, but it's a really lovely ideal.
Yeah, it's true. And I've thought a lot about what you talked about earlier about let's do all the things. And then you realize, oh, that's going to be a lot of work. And then they limit the scope to a proof of concept of 5 things. The problem with limiting the scope then is you've necessarily made a very small map that maybe is not going to be useful for 98, 99% of the other people that don't need those 5 things. Or if they need
Yep.
those 5 things and the 20 other things in conjunction, that would be helpful, but the 5 things alone are not helpful to them. So this is why people throw up their hands and say it's too much work. Because I did 5 things and that was a lot of work. And gosh, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to tag up the things. So let's think about that as a scarcity mindset where tagging up with humans is very, very hard. But I think these days with large language model, we can think abundance. I think we can think about inputting any text, whether that text is a document, whether that text is a time entry, whether that text is a transcript, and then be able to take that text and tag it up with Sally tags. Saying this discussion just touched on breaches of contract and trade secret infringement and force majeure clauses and a merger agreement and. So if you were not relying on humans to be able to do that tagging, but instead to have the machine tag those things up programmatically, then you wouldn't have to settle for just 5 tags. You could say, take all of Sally's 18,000 tags and let the machine tag things up programmatically. So every time it says breach of contract, you tag it up with breach of contract. Every time it says force majeure, you tag it up with force majeure. And once we reach that abundance tool, that changes the game because then you don't have to settle for that 5 tags. You could be able to have a much more rich corpus that can be more helpful to more people, therefore will actually satisfy the holy grail of being able to find that document that will help me like we did 5 years ago. That is just like the thing that I'm doing right now. So I think that Microsoft GraphRag, for those who don't know, the knowledge graph is to be able to put together triples. Triples are nouns and verbs. Lawyer, drafted, motion to dismiss. Party, negotiated, force majeure clause. So the noun, verb, noun are triples, and GraphRag essentially uses those triples to say, show me all the documents where the lawyer negotiated a force majeure clause or where somebody filed a motion to dismiss. GraphRag, I think, has some really great promise. Coincidentally, I know that we've been talking for the last 30 minutes. Literally 45 minutes ago, I was on the phone with Microsoft's Tom Orison, who's doing some really cool things within legal operations within Microsoft. And we've talked a lot about the cool things that Tom is doing within Microsoft's in-house legal corporate department, thinking through tagging up all of their things with Sally tags. That is ingesting a lot of text, whether that be documents, time entries, et cetera, using a tool that Mike Bomarito, who you know has built for Soli, to where you ingest any text and then you can be able to tag it up with Sally tags programmatically. And all of that is free and open source. That is, Soli is making that free and open source under the Aliyah nonprofit that Mike is on and I'm on the board of. So this free and open source thing can be able to achieve the promise that I just said about 6 minutes ago. To be able to say, yes, if you could tag up all the text using a free and open source local tool that doesn't require GPUs, but as CPUs, that you could be able to just run it on a laptop locally without having to go to the internet. And if you tag these things up with a CPU power, how many more doors can this open up? And I think that, yes, if you tag it up, then you can connect them with triples, lawyer filed, motion dismiss. And once you connect it with triples, then connect it up with the GraphRag or something like GraphRag that Microsoft's doing. And then that opens up a panoply of other opportunities that are just a pipe dream at this point. I've been speaking a bit, Horace. What do you think?
No, this is great. So you've implicitly just spoken and covered the third point of this part of the conversation, which is once you have content that's been tagged up with the taxonomy, what can you do with it? You've just described a few use cases. I think it's one of those things that I see a lot where people are like, we're going to go tag things. And unless you know why you're doing it in the first place, you're going to come to the end of that tagging journey and go, okay, now what? So always start with the objective in mind, I think is important. But there's another point which you stated in the conversation, which I think is worth elaborating on. And that is you implicitly talked about tagging a piece of content with multiple tags. And I think that is a paradigm shift for a lot of lawyers and for a lot of KM teams, because historically in legal, people don't tag in the sense of applying a label to a piece of content. They allocate a folder. They go, this piece of content belongs in this folder. And in data science speak, it's the difference between multi-class versus multi-label classification. For anything modern, I think you need to have a multi-label solution. A piece of content can have multiple tags. A lot of law firms have not yet come to that point in their journey. And until they break out of that paradigm, they're still going to be stuck at this. Well, hang on, how can I find that thing if it's not in that folder? Google's been doing it for a decade. You don't need to put things in folders. You can just tag them. So implicitly in what you're talking about, Damien, there's a paradigm shift which I think law firms have to catch up on.
That's right. And when you think of folders versus tags, they're really the same thing, but a folder is a mere single tag. And you can only have one tag. And when you think of it that way, why would you constrain yourself with a folder, which is a single tag? Is this complaint? We on litigation have nature of suit codes. That is, what kind of case is this? And the nature of suit code might say it's a trade secret case or a trademark case. Then if you dig into the complaint, yes, it's a trade secret case and a breach of contract case and a copyright case and a patent infringement case, right? It is not a bucket. It is not a folder. It is not a single tag. They contain multitudes, right? Same thing for transactional. No, this is a force majeure contract. Yes, and a change of control, and, right? You need the multi-tagging to really map the space dimensionally. And so once you get out of no, this is one folder into a multi-tagging, it opens up a whole world of possibilities to be able to say, not only I want to find all of the merger agreements that involve China in industry X. Those are 3 tags that are, by the way, all Sally tags. But then once you've tagged it up that way, then you could also be able to say, I want to be able to find the nearest neighbor that is things like this that aren't necessarily tagged with these. And this is something that Amazon has figured out for decades now, to say people who like this book often like that book, right? You have to tag up this book, and then you have to tag up, Horace likes this book, Horace likes that book. Therefore, Damien likes book number 1. Damien might also like book number 2, right? That's the beauty of the graph that Amazon has created. That's also the beauty of the graph that Google has created, that Facebook has created. People who have this friend also probably would like that friend. They have these mutual friends. So as you start thinking that in the legal context, you could be able to say people who like a force majeure clause in a merger agreement that involves China might also like these 12 other clauses. And you don't actually get to that unless you first tag up force majeure, China, industry, then tag up the other ones, and then you could be able to do the correlations between those. What do you think of such a thing?
So I think there's a lot of work for all the startups and all the incumbents in this space to catch up on in 2025 to make that dream come true. While I think search is the hottest topic that's going to be coming up, the challenge is going to be, how do we implement? How do we solve search? How do we label everything? This is the beginning of a much, much longer conversation.
That's why I love having this conversation and this podcast with you. I think that if this had not been recorded, Horace, you and I would just be speaking over drinks at a conference. But now here we are, being able to be thankful for all the cool things that have happened, postulate as to what might happen in 2025. As we think about what we're thankful for, Damien Riehl, I'm very thankful for Horace Wu and our podcast for being able to think about smart things with you.
Damien, likewise, I'm thankful for the opportunity to talk, share ideas, and to get smarter every time we talk. So every 2 weeks, my IQ point kind of recovers a few points.
I would say that I have amongst the highest IQs of anybody in legal tech. So any few points above is going to put you heads and tails above everyone.
You're far too kind. I fake it. It's the glasses. They make me look smart.
Oh, that's funny. We all fake it until we make it, don't we?
And with that, I hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving and you don't have to fake any emotions. Just enjoy yourself. And I look forward to chatting in a couple of weeks with you and Stephanie Wilkins.
Likewise, Horace. Always fun talking to you, and to our listeners, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the next one.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.